Cool. So this is your chance to defend the role of a journalist. Does journalism in mobile games in particular need defending? I mean, do you want to just, if we start at this, then Alysia, are you going to introduce yourself very briefly and this sort of try and respond to the sort of question, does game journalism need defending right now? What do you think?
Cool. So my name's Lucia Judge. I'm the news editor of PocketGamer.biz. So obviously being a news editor, I think, of course, I'm going to defend games media. It's essentially getting stories written about your game and getting people to notice what you're doing from people who are literally dedicating their lives and are so passionate about the games that you're creating. I think people sometimes forget that games journalists are genuinely people too, and we're that sounds a bit stupid, but we're gamers at heart. We're not these kind of scary, horrible people that sit behind laptops and want to destroy games. We're genuinely passionate about them, and if you can give us a story and a game that we can write about and love as much as you do, then of course it's going to be great coverage for both you and us.
So Peter, you're not scared of destroying a game, surely?
Oh no. So I'm Peter Willington. I'm the editor of AppSpy.com, which is the video arm of Pocket Gamer. Yeah, I mean, games press, games critics, we talk about your games for free. It's free advertising, right? And it's positive advertising usually. So I mean, just on that sort of base opportunity cost level, it works. It's really, really effective, and it's really difficult to convince someone with an advert that playing your game is something that you should be doing, potentially. But it's much, much easier if somebody who is a trusted source, is a trusted authority, is the head of a community, says, hey, this World of Tanks game is all right, you know? So, yeah, I'd say it's great, it's definitely worth defending.
So Keith, is it any different being in sort of more, I don't know, mainstream media? Is that a better phrase? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think that's the thing with me is that as the video game editor of The Guardian, I'm kind of one step away from the traditional games media. So I cover games in a slightly different way. And is that still relevant? Yes, definitely. I hope so, or I'm out of a job. I think the way I look at games, and I think the way that the press, the specialist press, are going to have to continue to look at games, is as a kind of a culture with an overview of the industry and what games mean today. Like now, YouTube superstars have taken over that kind of preview role, have taken over the kind of enthusiast role. And so the games press has got to become more of a kind of authorial, a sort of aggregational voice to get the content together, find out what it means. What does it mean for culture? Like, if you take something like movies, for example, if you look at the way The Guardian covers movies, it's not really that much about reviews and previews. It's about what does this movie mean in the wider zeitgeist. I promised myself I'd never use that word, and I've accidentally now used it. So what do games mean? And so we're kind of valuable. If you have a game or a story around your development studio that's important, that says something, then that's kind of where we come in. What did you know, last year, for example, take a game like, it wasn't a mobile game, in fact it was on our iPad, but this War of Mine, a really interesting game about civilians surviving in war and telling their stories. This is a very different view of the way war is usually depicted in video games. That's a really interesting story that we could pick up as a newspaper and use to explore what games mean. So I think that's kind of my role these days. It isn't so much here's a preview of a game, it's what does this mean in the wider cultural context. And if you want your game to say something in that context, then the press is the best place to come, possibly not a YouTuber.
So Jordan, what about you? Where do you come from this? Is it about professionalism? Is it about passion? I mean, what about the YouTube influence? Is that affecting the way you write?
Is this one on? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's actually why I thought it was interesting that I'm here as well as Keith. So I'm a freelancer, and Keith is one of the people I write for at The Guardian, but I also do stuff on YouTube, so I kind of straddle both the old and the new ways of doing game journalism, if you want to call it that. And it has definitely changed, and I'm in an interesting position because I'm freelance. I can choose what kind of things I do, and if the magazines stop paying quite as much, which is something that happens, then I can move over to somewhere else. Obviously, a staff writer isn't in that position. If they're at a magazine and they've decided to stay there, then they just have to keep defending the relevance of magazines until the magazine folds, which obviously as a freelancer I don't have to do. I do think it's interesting that newspapers, though, are still quite a big thing. Like, some newspapers don't cover games really at all, but the ones that do, they seem really, really interested in it. Like The Guardian, it's really good to see them bringing games out.
Well, that's Keith for you.
Exactly. But like, seeing the way that newspapers have been framing games coverage is interesting as well. Like Keith was saying, they've gone from doing the traditional like reviews and previews thing and moved it more into a cultural thing, which I think is important. They're moving away from, like, some newspapers have games in like the tech section purely, you know, like product reviews, but they are moving into more of a cultural thing, which I think is a good thing.
And I think that takes us to Chris quite neatly as well. I mean, your movement into sort of the esports side of things, I mean, it kind of turns the whole industry on its head, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's the audience who are now the entertainment that we're writing about. Is that fair?
It definitely does. So I'm the launch editor of eSports Pro, and I do a lot of freelance work with Red Bull eSports. So in the sort of traditional news media sense, I'm more of a sports journalist than a games media journalist. And looking at the way that other people consume media, the sort of stuff that I put out is more akin to interviews and trade-oriented things, letting other companies know how the successful companies in the esports world are being successful. And I don't think that there's very much scope for, say, hobbyist journalists, YouTubers, things like that, to go out there, get their interviews, and then put it into the context that someone in a trade can do. So I find that this side of games media journalism is probably one of the strongest at the minute. But that's not taken away from any of the others, obviously.
I mean, I'd be interested to know how that affects the sort of more sort of staff side, you know, the sort of trade side of the press. I'm thinking in terms of yourself. Are you seeing a deeper engagement with the readership affecting the way that you write, and is that affecting the usability and the usefulness of promoting games? I mean, what I'm particularly wondering is the role of game journalism more about brand building than it is about discovery? What do you think?
I think that building a brand is obviously very important, and journalism plays a massive part in that. You know, I mean, even even when you write about a story, you'll often tag a game, and then if you write about multiple stories about a game, then a reader coming into the site has this amazing bank of knowledge about your game or about your company, and so that's kind of branding just within the site. You've almost got a mini website within a big games website. Yeah, I think that obviously appealing to readership and building that relationship with readers, YouTubers with their viewers have this kind of, I think there's an air of celebrity about that which doesn't necessarily always exist within staff writers. You're not connecting with these journalists as people, but kind of the site that they belong to, and that can obviously feed into how your game's written about. But yeah, no, I think that in terms of developing a brand, obviously games journalism has a space for that.
I think it still has a space. I mean, the next thing I'm going to move on to is video, and I think, you know, Peter, you're obviously involved in that. I ought to declare a bias on this, though, of course. As the evangelist for Unity's EveryPlay, which is a community service, which focuses around video gameplay. I mean, I have to say that because that's what keeps me paid. But it's also, I think, really relevant to this because it shows the shift is towards people sharing information visually with each other, not necessarily through a fixed and established medium. As a fixed and established medium, sharing video, how does that change the way you work?
So I think that there is definitely a big move towards sharing video and to community-generated content as well. I think EveryPlay actually works really well. We actually have articles built entirely out of EveryPlay videos that the community's created and shared and stuff like that. And we sort of say, here are these 8 amazing crotch shots from this game you've never seen. Thanks, yeah, cheers. And you know, all that sort of like weird kind of fun, clickable, mashable kind of stuff. But there is still definitely a space for an authorial voice, and that definitely does come across better in video. Like the fact that hopefully everybody in this room knows who PewDiePie is because you know that he's got a weird little pug that comes and joins him on his games, and he's got that high-pitched intro that he does. You know, he's full of personality. And in that way, he becomes that authority, he becomes your friend. And I think that sites like AppSpy and PocketGamer, and there are other video websites as well, game trailers, for example, the more and more and more that they put their staff into the line of fire of actually being videoed, the more that those people become personalities and become trusted and become known. And again, it all ties into this. It's your mates who recommend you your favorite games. It's not some person who's just got a byline, or at least that's certainly in my experience.
I think I'm really glad you brought up PewDiePie in particular, because it allows me to shift the gear a little bit. And obviously, I was making a stupid joke about paying you money for mentioning every play, which again I think is a nice segue into a wider debate about the professionalisation of these kind of YouTube videos. And I think, you know, these individuals who are not necessarily journalistically trained, who are now being offered money, who don't necessarily have the experience to understand why they should be transparent about that. How do you think that's affecting? Keith, you want to kick this off? I mean, how do we think this is affecting the way we're consuming media, but also how much we can trust this new media?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, last year we saw the Gamergate controversy, which is still kind of rumbling on, and this idea of how much you can trust the media. And it did seem for a while as though YouTubers were being kind of held up as these paradigms of virtue that were uncorrupted by the publishing presence. And then it turned out that maybe that wasn't perhaps quite as true as it looked, and that there were possibly payments going on to YouTubers to advertise or speak well of certain products. And yeah, there is this whole issue which I think is developing. It's going to develop throughout this year of, well, YouTubers, are they kind of an objective, impartial voice in the industry, and how are they going to sort of establish a trust relationship with audience members after it's kind of been. It's out there that, in fact, they are kind of used as part of the marketing and promotional tools of video game developers. So I think, you know, there's a long process that's going to have to be undertaken. It's the same process as the video game magazine print industry went through in the early 80s. Exactly. When, you know, video game magazines started off as the Enthusiast Press.
Dorito-gate, anyone remember that?
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a very silly argument that people had over who was getting what perks, but sorry, Karen.
Doritos Gate was very important as well. I mean, I think within the video games community, there's a lot of cynicism about the relationships between video games presenters and writers in all spheres of the industry, and it's something that everyone has to work out. And for a while, YouTube has kind of got a get out of jail free card, but I think that's been put back in the deck now because we know a little bit more about how that business works. So I think the whole industry, the whole games media industry, including YouTube, including people who deal mostly in social media, have to fundamentally deal with that transparency issue. But it's difficult for me because obviously I'm that kind of step removed, and I feel as though I am. I'm not making videos, and I'm not holding myself up as a sort of a paradigm as a people cynic, as lots of YouTube superstars are. I'm very much more about the love of the culture and the interest and the fascination of games. One thing I want to say before I take the microphone away is I think, the whole idea, is the media worth bothering with? And I would say, yes, it is. Games are a form of communication now. They're not just products. They're a way of people expressing themselves. If you're a games developer in this room, one of the things you want to do is express yourselves. And that has brought games into another era, another domain. And you have to be part of a communicate. You have to be part of like the conversation that's going on. You have to be part of culture. And to do that, you have to be known by us and to be known by the media. I don't think you can really, in this day and age, bring out a game in isolation and expect it to do well. I think you have to be part of the communication that's going on between creatives and between fans and between kind of, the cultural voices of our time. So that's why I'd say that we're still relevant.
I think I'd like to come back to that, but before I do...
I just wanted to say before I...
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We should do that as the next question. But seeing we've got Jordan here, and she's treading both sides of the fence between the sort of YouTuber and the writer, and somebody who's being paid professionally for her writing and still presenting. How does this kind of whole debacle about kind of where the source of income come from and the transparency affect you in your position?
Yeah, so as someone who's been doing YouTube for a couple of years, I've actually experienced this change myself. Transparency is becoming more of a thing on YouTube. You now have to put I think in the title of the video, or at least you have to put like a thing on your video in the corner that says if the content is sponsored, or you will have to soon at least. And we've started doing that in the videos that we make. We now put a thing in the corner if it's, you know, if Nintendo or someone has helped to produce the video or whatever. And I think as long as the YouTubers are regulated like that in the same way as the press are, it'll just settle down into the same kind of thing. It's just a different kind of content playing a similar role. But there is a bit of a generational divide. So like, there is this kind of cultural side of games that the people who've grown up with games are interested in reading about. But the kids who are playing just iPad games at home, they just want to watch videos to know about the game. They don't want to read about, you know, the cultural background of where the history of the game comes from or anything. And they don't care if your video was sponsored by Nintendo. As long as it says that there and it's all ethical, then that's fine. They just want to know more about the game.
So I mean, that takes us to the eSports, yeah. Which is, so arguably you could say that eSports is even easier because it's clear that you've got sponsors. That's a natural thing. Is that true, or is there some sort of hidden kind of murkiness that we need to be wary of in future?
No, definitely. On the eSports front, especially if you're watching a game, they'll have sponsorship everywhere, and it's really upfront about it. It's the sort of backdoor things that YouTubers are getting into a little bit of hot water about at the minute. But just going back to something that Jordan said about how some gamers might not be so interested in the cultural background of the games that they're playing. They might just want to see the gameplay. I was talking to Pewdiepie of Deconstruct Team, and he was saying that if he wanted to go and find out what a game was about, he would watch a Let's Play. But if he wanted to find out what the developer was thinking, what influences they drew from, and what he could learn from them making that game, he would go out and he would seek interviews from The Guardian and other such mainstream publications where they would have a lot deeper cultural understanding of what the process of making a game involves.
So I think that kind of gives us a sort of segue into Keith's question as well. And I think let's try and kind of, given time, let's kind of smoothly try and sum up. So what do you think is the cultural role that you, in your role in journalism, plays? And what's the best way for the audience to engage with you? If we could answer that each, and then I think we're neatly summed up. So, Alysia, do you want to hit that one?
Fundamentally, I think it's that idea of communication. I think culturally, the media is all about telling these stories, and obviously the best way to engage with us is just those. Either if you're a developer reaching out, I mean, we've just had a great presentation on exactly how to reach out to the media, taking all those kind of points. If you're a reader, I mean, there's so many channels now. You can it's not just in the days of print where you had to write a letter and wait responses. There's immediate, even on Pocket Gamer at the moment, on the consumer site, there's now a little community IM tool. So there's this whole community in an instant message chat room where you can connect not only with the writers but the other readers of the site. So yeah, I think fundamentally it's just this enabling of communication, this immediate, instantaneous communication that the media provides, which isn't necessarily present in other avenues.
Yeah, I think that the games media now is about building communities, and that's kind of its primary function, certainly from my side of things. And I would say mainstream video game consumers, I suppose. It's about kind of building up that relationship and talking with your viewers, talking with your readers. But on the other side of things, there's also having that relationship with the developer, you know, with the games, you know, with the other side of, you know, the games industry, and actually building those connections and forging those relationships so that we do always have access to the coolest games and the coolest content and the stuff that people really want to see first. And I suppose the other thing is having the name of Pocket Gamer or whatever it is, to be able to go to somewhere like, let's say, a Game Loft, and be able to say, we want early access to your thing because our cool friends, or, you know, who watch our stuff always want that stuff. So I guess that's part of its relationship as well.
Yeah, I think if you can kind of compare the media strata to maybe the way that, let's kind of compare it to movies and the way you consume movies. So I would say like using social media to get the message about your game is kind of like the way people use BitTorrent to get movies. It's kind of like fast and dirty and illegitimate. Whereas YouTube is kind of more like Netflix, in that you go in, you know kind of what you want to watch, you know kind of what you want to know, and you get it, and that's all you get. Whereas I guess the old school media, like for example me, are more like the Blu-ray special edition box set of media, in that people will come to us knowing that they're going to get the story about the game, but also the kind of wider cultural analysis and what it means and where it could lead. So you know, there's three. I think those are three different stratas of the way that the media kind of works today in games. I'm kind of happy to be at the box set end, being a sad middle-aged man. I'm kind of comfortable there, but that's how it works. And I think we've still got a role in that. Like Jordan's right. I think you know, younger gamers don't really care where they get their media from. And they don't really care about the wider message, but they will get older and they will mature. So that is always going to be important.
So as a freelancer, obviously the temptation is to say that my role is just whatever people will pay me to do, but it kind of varies from audience to audience. So obviously when I'm writing for The Guardian, I'm writing for a completely different audience than when I'm making videos for Family Gamer TV. My role there is very much like an informational one. I'm making videos for parents, and the kind of thing I'm talking about is very different from what I'll be talking about in an article that I write for The Guardian. And I think that's important to remember, that it's not just, you can't kind of drill it down into one thing that the games media needs to do and one kind of person that they need to target. There are all these different kinds of audiences that want to know different things, and they want to know them in different ways. And as long as that is true, then I'm happy doing all sorts of different things all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I can improve on Keith's analogy there, but everything at the moment is going to start to coexist, and everything's going to shuttle down, and you'll be able to go and get your film trailers or your special director's cut edition, and yeah, if there's something that someone wants to know, there will be a media for them to get it from.
I think that's really where I think it sums it up. I mean, the fact is that media hasn't disappeared, it's become more diverse. And we have media which has been created by individuals who are consuming it themselves. It's been created by professionals who will be able to give their insight and the authority that the brand that they represent delivers. And so engagement isn't just about dealing with an individual journalist anymore who happens to have the voice to the audience you want, who you can know, because that doesn't exist. It's now about having all the voices who you can share a consistent message across to the people who are going to advocate. And maybe, if we're lucky, those advocates will then promote your game as well. So it's all of the above. On that note, I'm going to thank the journalists very much for taking part. I hope that was useful. Sorry I can't ask questions. We're running out of time again. Thanks very much, guys.